I think I see there's a... Saving one for the Rabbi, that's good. It's a new film that's just out, I don't know, maybe 10 days in theaters, and I think last night started streaming. I think it's on Netflix. It's a retelling of the Frankenstein story by the director Guillermo del Toro. So that's Mary Shelley, that kind of classic tale, creation, rejection. We know the story very well. A father. What's the name of the father? Maybe we don't know it well. I don't know. It's Victor Frankenstein is his name. Victor Frankenstein, right? And he brings life into the world, creates this creature, but then once created, he cannot bear to live with what he has brought to life. Haunting story, very old story as well. Mary Shelley, certainly not the first to imagine a creature brought to life by human hands. She also was not the first to explore the themes that she does in the novel, themes of pain and loss, and how pain and loss can sometimes sort of fill in the space between a creator on the one hand and the creation on the other. So long before Frankenstein, Jewish tradition told a similar story. I'm guessing you've probably all heard of it. What is the Jewish story that's like Frankenstein? The Golem, right? The Golem, usually set in Prague. Legend about the Golem, a kind of creature of mud being brought to life by Rabbi Yehuda Lau, who was known also as the Maharal, one of the great commentators of that time, creates the Golem to protect the Jews of Prague. And like Victor Frankenstein's monster, the Golem that the Maharal creates, according to legend, is a creature of love, but also of fear, a creature of great power, but also at the same time a creature of vulnerability. And the Golem, like the Frankenstein creation, the Frankenstein monster, also becomes uncontrollable, and his creator must ultimately destroy him. Remember how the creator destroys the Golem? Anybody know? Say it louder, Leslie. So the Golem, according to legend, has the Yud-He Vav-He that we pronounce as Adonai, sort of in the forehead of the creature. And if you're able to erase that, then the creature no longer exists, and that is in fact the way the creature is destroyed. In both stories, in the story of the Golem and also Frankenstein, there's a question that's sort of at the heart of the narratives that is a challenging question, disturbing even maybe. What is it that happens when the bond between parent and child, the bond between, again, the creator and the creation becomes broken? When the love that should bind together, that should connect, when that love instead turns to darker things, turns to fear or shame or disappointment, and sometimes, and in these stories, even violence. Now, I said a second ago that the motif that Mary Shelley was drawing on is an old literary motif. Again, from our tradition, the Golem that legend preceded Mary Shelley's writing of Frankenstein. But the truth is, the Torah itself is intensely interested in these same kinds of questions and these very same dynamics, because what is the Torah? At least, particularly the book of Genesis, if not an exploration of the relationships between children and parents. Think about it for a second. The story, particularly of fathers and sons, runs like a current, like a river, through the entire book of Genesis. You see it over and over and over again. You see it with Abraham and Isaac, and then in the next generation, Isaac and his sons, Esau and Jacob, and then the next generation, Jacob and his 12 sons. The relationships are never simple, never smooth, always filled with tension and longing and rivalry and misunderstanding. And then sometimes, many of them actually, there are these moments of beautiful and deep and maybe even profound reconciliation. So the Torah is deeply aware of and concerned with how difficult it is to raise a next generation, and also of how fragile the bonds that link one generation to the next can be, but also at the same time of how sacred those bonds must be in order for Judaism to continue. We say it all the time, Ledor Vador, from one generation to the next. And Parshat Vayera, which Samantha read from so beautifully this morning, is, I would argue, the Torah's paradigmatic exploration of precisely this theme. The Parsha begins with Abraham sitting at the entrance to his tent, welcoming three mysterious visitors, and it ends in the 22nd chapter of Genesis with Abraham on top of Mount Moriah, with Isaac lying on an altar, a makeshift altar, and Abraham with a knife over his beloved son. And Abraham's story is framed by two divine calls, two, if you will, lech lechas. That phrase appears in the Torah, that phrase lech lecha, only two times, only twice in the Torah. You probably know it best from Parshat Lech Lecha, which we read last week, rather Genesis 12, very first verse there, Lech Lecha me'artzecha. So Abraham, you Lech Lecha, go out, me'artzecha, from your land, mimoladetecha, the place of your birth, umi beit avicha, by the way, and from your father's house, right? That calls the beginning of everything. It's the beginning of the whole story, the Abraham and Sarah cycle of narratives, etc. And when he steps away from the world of his father, steps away from the patterns and traditions of his past, and he goes on this journey into what at the time for him is entirely unknown. He doesn't even know where he's supposed to go. He just knows he's supposed to go. That's the first Lech Lecha. The second Lech Lecha is in this morning's Torah portion. Second Lech Lecha is in this morning's Parsha. It's in Genesis 22. It's the very beginning, almost the very beginning of the Akedah story, the binding of Isaac story, where God says to Abraham, again, it's only the second one, the only two in the entire Torah, Lech Lecha el Eretz HaMoriah. Go out to the land of Moriah, and we know the rest of the story. From there, offer your son up as a sacrifice. So think about it. The first Lech Lecha asks Abraham to separate from his father. The second Lech Lecha asks Abraham to separate from his son, right? The first separating from his father, the second from his son. And in a way, Abraham's spiritual life is bracketed by these two Lech Lechas, these two calls, these two painful acts of needing to let go of something. So in the first, what's Abraham letting go of? He's letting go of the past, the identity that was given to him, his father's house, the ancestral gods, place of origin, and all of that to become his own person. And in the second, giving up his son, Abraham, in a sense, being asked to give up the future, because that's the only child through whom his story is meant to continue. But he agrees and he goes along. And so often the case when the Torah is exploring a universal theme, what does it mean to dwell in that space between those two Lech Lechas, between those two separations? What does it mean for us, growing away from our parents, and also what does it mean for us allowing our children to grow away from us? Andy and Marcy, what does that mean, right? So anyone who's ever been a parent knows that one of the hardest things to figure out how to do is to hold your child and let go of them at exactly the same time. And yet that's what we have to do as parents. Now, when our children are small, it's not an issue, right? Because we feed them and protect them and teach them and shape them, and we're with them every single day. But a time comes in their life, Samantha, okay? Time comes in their life when they begin to move forward and to move outward, Lech Lecha, and they find their own paths and they make their own choices. And by the way, sometimes they even reject some of the things that we have given. Can you imagine that? Rejecting some of the things that we've given them. But that happens too. That's part of what growing up means, right? The question really is, in these necessary separations in our lives, how can we create that space that has to exist between a parent and a child, a space that is wide enough to enable growth to happen, that is healthy in that way, and at the same time close enough for love and connection and caring to always remain strong, for the bond always to remain strong. And that is precisely what Victor Frankenstein fails to do. He's unable to do it. When the creature comes to life, he's horrified by what he sees, and he runs away from his creation, and he cannot bear to stay in relationship with the thing that he has brought into the world. And it's because of that rejection that the monster becomes a monster. The tragedy of Frankenstein is not that a man brings something to life, it's that he abandons that life, abandoning what he created. But then there's Abraham. Abraham never abandons his children. It's not to say the relationships that he has with his children are easy. They are not easy. If you know the story, you know that for sure. He struggles with his son Ishmael, nearly loses Isaac, as we see in this morning's Parsha. But in both cases, Ishmael and Isaac, you see Abraham is engaged. He's a prayerful father. He's responsive as a father. He argues with God on Ishmael's behalf. He listens when God tells him to send Ishmael away. He does. We blame him for that. But the truth is, he is deeply grieved in that moment. The Torah makes sure to tell us of that. And then after the Akedah, this morning's binding of Isaac story, the text does suggest that there is a distance that develops between Abraham and Isaac, but the bond between them is not destroyed. And Isaac will continue his father's covenant, the Brit, and he does become the next link in the chain of the tradition. The paradoxical challenge that the Torah is wrestling with is this: figure out how to love your children so much that you can let them go. Love them so much that you can let them go. Teach them and guide them and try to shape them in every way that you can, in your image even, but remember that they are also God's creation, so they are not ours alone. And then the Torah also has a message for children. Don't forget the home that you came from, okay? Don't forget the home. I know you won't, Samantha. Even as you leave your parents' home and carry the blessings forward with you. It says in the Kabed et avicha v'et imecha, you should honor your father and your mother. But that doesn't mean you have to stay the same. It doesn't mean you have to live the same way and do the same things or live out their hopes and dreams. You do that, but in your way, not theirs. And at the heart of all of this is the Brit, the covenant that exists. What God offers Abraham, God doesn't say to Abraham, you will live forever. God says, you will have generations that will follow you. There will be continuity. God does not promise Abraham life eternal. God promises Abraham, Vayeh bracha, you will be a blessing. Blessings will come from you. And to be a blessing means to create something that lasts beyond you, not because it never changes, but because it just continues to grow, one generation after another. How are you doing that? How are you creating that blessing in your own lives, in your own homes? That's how the Jewish story survives. And maybe that is the deepest meaning of the two Lech Lechas that frame Abraham's story. We are called to leave our parents' home, our parents' world, to leave our children free to make their own decisions as well, and yet through all of that to remain connected, midor vador, from one generation to the next through love and faith. And at the end of Frankenstein, and here's a spoiler alert, if you don't know the story, you probably, Victor Frankenstein lies dying. Remember, they're up in the Arctic. He's dying, and he confesses his failure, which is not that he created life, but that he did not take responsibility for it. And the creature, too, at the end, it's a very moving scene, I think, weeps for his lost father, and then the creature disappears, never to be seen again. Think how Abraham's story ends in a completely different way. He passes the covenant to Isaac, who will pass the covenant to Jacob, and so on, and so on, and so on. And here we sit in shul in 2025, almost 2026, holding that same covenant all those generations later. The Torah doesn't give us perfect families, not even close, but it gives us families that struggle, argue, hurt each other, but forgive when they need to. But it does give us families who learn how, even if it's painful sometimes, to love across generations. Again, Lador, Vador. And at the end of Abraham's life, his sons, Ishmael and Isaac, and again, not always easy relationships, but they come together to bury their father with respect and tenderness, and I think also a sense of love. That's the work of Lech Lecha. That's the work of going forth. We're all creator sometimes we are creation. How do we learn to step away and draw close simultaneously, to give space and also to hold fast, to bless sometimes, and to receive blessing as well? At the end of the day, Lech Lecha is the beginning of a quest narrative, a search for the space, a space where love and freedom can meet at the same time, holding and letting go. May that space become for us, for them, a place of covenant, of blessing, and also of shalom, of peace. Shabbat shalom.